Many of the things that the Civil Rights Movement and Dr. King fought for is at stake. Many of the things that you and I have struggled around, voting rights, police reform, civil liberties, are at stake. So we take very seriously who is going to be contending in the next election. We're going to hear from 12 of the candidates in this convention. As I said, we've been hearing from them for the last 19 years. Now, some of you already are on some sides. Hear them. Do not be disrespectful. And some of you have not chosen a side. You need to hear them. And we're going to understand that we may not agree on everything, but we must agree on basic things. Voting rights, health care for everyone, criminal justice reform, including mass incarceration and police reform, those are non-negotiable to those of us in the civil rights community.
That's right, Rev.
How we get there, we can debate and we can discuss. As the race got going, I'm very observant of the races, have been involved a long time, ran once myself. One young man emerged like a rock star. And I'm suspicious of rock stars. Y'all know James Brown helped raise me. So I know the difference between what's live and Memorex. Dr. Richards was in church, but I was hanging with JB. And where this young man caught my attention was when he stood and said, wait a minute, I defend the right for athletes to take a knee for what they are standing for. Now, he was running in Texas against Ted Cruz, and that was not a politically expedient statement. Then I caught him again talking about white privilege, and I'd never seen a major white candidate for president talk about white privilege. I didn't see many minor candidates. And so it is no accident that he's the first of the presidential candidates to come and speak to us this morning. He's the former candidate for the Senate for Texas, former congressman, and we all are happy that he's kicking off our presidential presentation. Beto O'Rourke.
Good morning. Bring you greetings from my hometown of El Paso, Texas. There's two people from El Paso. You know that we are one half of this hemisphere's largest binational community. We also happen to be one of the safest cities in the United States of America, not despite the fact that we are a city of immigrants and asylum seekers, but because of the fact that we are a city of immigrants and asylum seekers. So we bring you greetings. We're also the home of Dr. Lawrence Nixon, who moved to El Paso at the start of the 20th century to practice medicine. Because of his race, he was unable to do that in East Texas, so he came to El Paso. But not only was he a leader in our medical community, he was a leader in our civil rights community. He founded the first chapter of the NAACP in the state of Texas in our hometown of El Paso. And in 1924, with his poll tax in hand, he walked in to a polling place tried to go to the voting booth, but was denied the ability to vote simply because of the color of his skin. He took that case, his right as an American, as a citizen, to the Supreme Court twice. And thanks to his courage and his persistence, he was able to vote, but it was 20 years later. Same polling place, 1944. His lawsuit not only integrated the all-white Democratic primary in the state of Texas in that year, but it set the path for other leaders who would follow him, like Thelma White, who in 1954, 10 years later, graduated from the all-black, because it was the only school she could go to, high school, Douglas High in El Paso, Texas, had the audacity to try to enroll in Texas Western College, but again was refused because of the color of her skin. With the help of attorney Thurgood Marshall, and in front of the federal bench of R.E. Thomason, they were able to integrate higher education in the state of Texas and coincidentally strike down the segregation clause in our state constitution. Those stories of persistence, of courage, of a willingness to do whatever it takes to make sure that you are treated like a man, like a woman, like a citizen in your own country. The story that I heard from Willie McLeod when I was recently in Rock Hill, South Carolina. He was part of the Friendship 9 that integrated the lunch counter in that community, not just by getting arrested and being harmed and mistreated by their fellow citizens, but not posting bail for 30 days and sitting in jail to shock the conscience and galvanize not just Rock Hill, not just South Carolina, but this country. So I have thought for a long time, because of those stories, that that is the history of change and civil rights and the path forward. A courage, a perseverance that leads to success. But when I look at the facts, and I listen to those whom I wish to serve as President of the United States, I see something different, something foundationally, systematically wrong in this country. 75 years after Dr. Lawrence Nixon won the right to vote in Texas, we have an infant mortality discrepancy between white and black America that is worse today than it was in 1850, 15 years before the abolition of slavery. We have a maternal mortality crisis in this country. It is 3 times as deadly for women of color. And it is not just owing to the fact that we do not have universal health care for every American, which we must. And it is not just to blame on the state of Texas, the epicenter of that maternal mortality crisis that has shut down more than a quarter of its family planning clinics, denying so many women the right to a cervical cancer screening, family planning help, or a provider of any kind. It is the way that this country was founded. It is the system in which these women are living right now, the daily weathering that they endure when even they are able to get health care. It is not sufficient, it is not enough, and it only begins to help to explain these discrepancies. Reverend Sharpton mentioned the incarceration rate in this country. We put more of our own people behind bars per capita than any other country on the face of the planet, disproportionately black and brown. Now, we are arresting people for possession of a substance that is legal in more than half the states of the country. And after they have served time and are released, they're going to check a box on any and every employment application form, making it less likely that they get that job, making it almost impossible to get a federally sponsored student loan to improve themselves in higher education, narrowing their options and closing down their future. But we will not be able to achieve real justice in this country by only ending the prohibition on marijuana, though we must, and expunging the arrest records of those caught for possession of something that's legal in so much of the country, though we must do that as well. We must also end the cash bail system. We must also end prisons for profit. And we must also conclude a war on drugs that has become a war on people. But we must also acknowledge that this country, ever since the end of slavery, and certainly after Reconstruction, has criminalized and suppressed some communities solely based on the color of their skin, their ethnicity, their country of national origin. In a kindergarten classroom, where those children are 5 years old, a child of color is 5 times as likely to be disciplined, suspended, or expelled as a white child in the same classroom in front of the same teacher. So this schoolhouse to jailhouse pipeline and this problem of mass incarceration is much deeper than police, than our courts. It is our country, and we absolutely must face it. And 75 years after Dr. Lawrence Nixon voted, Texas ranked 50th in the country in voter turnout. Now, that's not because we love our democracy any less than you do here in New York or any other state in the Union. We were literally drawn that way. The courts found in 2017 that some Texans, solely based on their race or their ethnicity, were drawn out of a congressional district, therefore drawn out of a reason to vote, therefore drawn out of their very democracy to predictable results. In Texas, you can use your license, your permit to carry a firearm to prove who you are at the ballot box, but in Texas, you cannot use your student ID at Texas Southern University or the University of Texas at Austin to prove who you are at the ballot box. There are some changes that we need to make in this country. Structural, foundational, systemic changes if we are ever going to get the most and the best out of every single one of us. The only response to this concentration of wealth and power and privilege, and the very human response to that by those who hold it, which is to continue to aggregate it, the inertia of power in this country, is democracy, both political democracy and economic democracy. We've got to make sure that we confront those who will use fear to hold on to that power, as our president uses fear to hold on to that power, to make us angry, to keep us apart, to make us fearful of one another and even of ourselves. The unrestrained money and influence that buys access and outcomes in this country, that invites the cynicism of our fellow Americans, their disengagement, their distrust from their very democracy. A powerful democracy, both political and economic, that ensures that every single one of us can see ourselves in the future of this country, must be obtained, but it must be obtained against those who are using power right now and the safeguards of our democracy to manipulate it in front of our eyes. Members of Congress who choose their own voters, a Supreme Court who says that corporations are people and money is speech, PACs that can buy the outcomes of election and legislation, and voting rights that are not extended but are functionally withdrawn in states like mine and through much of the South today. Now, not only must we sign into law a new Voting Rights Act so that every single American's vote counts and they count equally, not only must we end gerrymandering and big unaccountable money in our politics, we must make sure that we have same-day and automatic voter registration in every single county, in every single state throughout the United States of America. But there is cause for hope. And I promised Reverend Sharpton that I would just not dwell on disappointment. I would make sure that I describe a path that I see for this country moving forward. And I see that path in, of all places, shining in Texas right now. Because the last 2 years, visiting every single county in Texas, all 254, no matter how red and rural, no matter how blue and urban, everyone deserving of respect, of being listened to, learned from, and heard, I got to be part of something absolutely extraordinary. And though we did not win that race against Senator Cruz, though we came awfully close, 2.6% for those who are counting, we saw a true revival of our democracy. We saw 2 new members of Congress, both Democrats, winning in seats long held by Republicans that thought were not even in contention before. We saw the composition of our state legislature, which controls gerrymandering and redistricting, begin to change. Last night, Candace Quarles, an African-American woman on the DeSoto City Council, just passed paid family leave in Dallas County, which is going to mean real progress for real families that she represents. And at the end of the day, On election night in November of 2018, 17 African American women won judicial positions of power in our country's most diverse city. So as I learned at Paul Quinn College on the opening day of their Summer Bridge program with President Michael Sorrell, we can meet disappointment with a power and joy of people. This campaign has the ability to bring people together, not just to secure the nomination, not just to defeat President Trump, as important as that is, but to bring this country, every single one of us, together in a movement to ensure that we change the structure of this country, to bring out the very best from every single one of us. That is why I am so honored to be able to run to serve you as president, and so grateful for the invitation from Chairman Richardson and Reverend Sharpton and each one of you from the National Action Network at this 28th convention to address you today. Thank you for having us out. I am very, very grateful. Appreciate it. Thank you.
Before he leaves, and I think he was specific, I want to ask you two questions. One is your fellow Texan, Sheila Jackson Lee, has proposed a commission to study reparations. If that passes and you are President of the United States, would you sign that bill?
Yes. You want me to expand? And I appreciate the woman who asked me to say yes or no. I had a chance to speak with and just listen to and learn from Brian Stevenson in Montgomery, Alabama, and learn from his work on working with the community to build a memorial to justice and to peace. And he said, foundational to reparations is the word repair. Foundational to repair is the truth. And until all Americans understand that civil rights are not just those victories that I began with at the outset of my comments, but the injustices that have been visited and continue to be visited on people, we will never get the change that we need to live up to the promise of this country. So absolutely, I would sign that into law. Thank you.
Lastly, as you know, we have fought many of the cases around police misconduct. Parents of Sean Bell and other victims are here. We are not anti-police. We think many police, if not most, are good, but those that step outside the law, we need to have accountable. This president stopped, through his Justice Department, consent decrees in counties that had a pattern of police abuse. If you became president, would you bring back the option of the Justice Department coming in with consent decrees in those cities that it was required or necessary?
The answer to this one is also yes, and I really appreciate the way that you framed this question, Reverend Sharpton, because we support our police officers and our sheriff's deputies. Absolutely. We know that they have an incredibly difficult job, and as I attempted to make the case earlier, they are one part of a larger system, not just of criminal justice in this country, but a system that has successfully suppressed some Americans based on their race for as long as we have been a country. So a war on drugs that has become a war on people. National Action Network showed me through your work here in New York City that though all Americans use marijuana at the same rate, regardless of their race, only some Americans likely to be of color would be stopped and frisked to be found for possession, go behind bars, and endure the consequences that other Americans would not. So yes, there must be accountability for the enforcement of the law. There must be accountability for use of force. And federal funds to local police departments and sheriff's departments must be tied to accountability, full, transparent reporting for use of force, and justice for those who use of force illegally against those citizens whom they are sworn to serve and protect. Thank you.
Give him a hand. Beto O'Rourke. All right. What are you talking about? You like him? You didn't hear the rest of the candidates yet. Beto, you done come in here and wiped out my board.